Hello everyone, lovely to be in Byron. I haven't been here for many decades actually. I came here in my early 20s and lived at Nimbin for a while and Kyogle, so it's lovely to be back up here. So I'm going to talk about managed retreat, smart and resilient cities. I was going to try and get into synthetic rewiring of genetic material basically and biology, but I don't think I'm going to get there. I've got 45 minutes. So I was about 2 months ago, I was listening to Reality Check Radio, which is in New Zealand. It's the old Voices for Freedom group that set up a radio station, and one of the women being interviewed was from Kapiti, and she was talking about managed retreat in Kapiti in New Zealand, and that there were certificates going on people's homes to say that there were really big problems with the homes due to climate change modelling, and that the people themselves in those towns weren't even aware, and adaptation plans going through. So I was like, oh, because nothing's happening organically in countries, so I thought I'd better have a look. And then I found on the World Economic Forum, I found this article or this report from the Climate Council of Australia. So, Uninsurable Nation, Australia's most climate vulnerable places. So I apologise in advance. I'm going to take you through 45 minutes of government and private body papers, but I think we need to know what's going on, what's being said, and get a little in front of what's happening. Okay, so there's a ranking of the 10 most at-risk electorates from climate change and extreme weather events, based on the percentage of high-risk properties in each federal electorate across Australia. So when they say high risk, and high risk means it's uninsurable, that's where 1% is estimated per year for the property price for damage. So 1%. So if you've got a house that's valued at $320,000 and I think it's like $3,200 they estimate you're going to have to pay every year, you're high risk, and then you're uninsurable. Mid-risk is 0.2% to 1%. So if you're 0.2, it's like $600 a year for whatever they say is a climate, they're estimating that you're going to need to do those repairs on your house. That puts you in the mid-risk, which means, from what I'm reading, that your insurance will go up. So they're saying 1 in every 25 will be high risk and uninsurable. In addition to that, 9% of property, so another 1 in 11 will reach the medium risk by 2030. Okay, so insurance will become increasingly unaffordable or unavailable in large parts of Australia due to worsening extreme weather. The modelling that they're using, so again, I'm new to this, so I'm not saying I'm all over everything. There's a lot of documents to get through. So they're using this XDI, this company's called XDI, or climate valuation. They're using their metrics for this, and it's a maximum to date value at risk of extreme weather. So they're looking back at weather records, and then they're modelling with what they think is going to be climate change risks in the future, and then they put that and compound that together to get a number. And then, so I'll go through this, but this is the same company that the government, New South Wales government, is using. So it combines long-term data from meteorological stations with information about the specific location, such as flood mapping and depths, elevation above sea level, tides and waves, soil type, forest cover, and data on the assumed building at that address. And then they look at the influence of future climate change is derived by looking at, they're then going from models. So they have climate change models from agencies such as the CSIRO, University of New South Wales, University of Queensland, and the US National Ocean and Atmospheric Administration. So this is just complete modelling. So they're looking at different models and assessing that. So how they've gone about this is they've gone, okay, look, because there's a lot of different models for climate change. So they've looked at the most extreme climate change model that's possible for getting wetter in the future. And then they've taken, okay, so we're going to look at this area, we're going to look at it from the model that says, this is the most extreme amount of rain that could happen in this area, and we get a number for that. Then we're going to, the same area, so say it's Byron, then we're going to look at the most extreme model for fire and no rain. and we're going to get that number, and then we're going to get that for Byron as well. So we're going to go, okay, Byron's got this chance of this really high amount of fire, this really high amount of, flooding, and then they compound all those high-risk situations into a number. So they're looking at high risk, compounding it. So it's not like we're going to look at one model, say it's like flooding, then there's not going to be any bushfires. They're going to look at the most extreme for bushfires as well. And I think Senator Jared Rennick made a comment that he asked the ex-CSIRO CEO, Larry Marshall, which model they're using, and he said which one. I think it was something like we've got 40 different types we can use. So I just also wanted to go back to the CSIRO because they're using CSIRO modelling. Larry Marshall was a CEO until last year. I think and this is back in 2005. Well, it was 8 years ago. So what was that? 2016. There was a big controversy at the CSIRO because he's a venture capitalist, and when he came in, at some point he fired quite a lot of climate scientists and said basically the science is settled and now we have to go into mitigation around climate change. I'm not going to get to what mitigation is, but it is things like synthetic foods. It's very synthetic, and it includes things like cloud brightening, where you spray things into the clouds so the sunshine is reflected back, and other very disturbing things. I just also want to mention, while I'm on the CSIRO, Bill Barty. He's also works with so Larry Marshall and Bill Barty set up Blackbird, and that's a venture capital firm who is funding the first lab meat that's about to be allowed into the Australian market. And Bill, with the CSIRO, set up a venture capital firm that's funding a lot of this synthetic food. Okay, so the Climate Council has a map, a climate risk map. So you can go on and look, and you can just search for different suburbs. So Byron Bay, 0 high risk, 1,563 medium risk, but this is you can either go small, medium or large emission scenarios, so that will change. If you've got a larger emission scenario, you'll get a higher amount at risk, and you can look at 230 and I think 2060. Lismore is 1,000, I can't read that, 160 high risk and 6,000 medium risk. So you can go on and check out what they're saying about your area. These are their solutions. There needs to be investing in risk reduction and resilience. There's a need to upscale public investments in resilience and develop innovative financing pathways. That's always concerning. And the process for allocating public funds towards resilience projects must be independent and data-driven. So public funds towards resilience projects, and then it's going to be a lot of having to improve your buildings and your houses that you live in for improving building standards and compliance, and then support communities to build back better. So this is about being moved off managed retreat and the communities being built back better. So the 10 most at risk federal electorates, so is Richmond and Page. I'll just pull those two out because that's relevant to here. In these 10 electorates alone, 15% of properties, or around 1 in 7 properties, will be uninsurable within 10 years. Okay, so you've got those areas. So they're those areas that they're talking about there, and the towns that are within it. It's starting to come out. So even though I'd never heard about managed retreat, nobody I know has ever heard about managed retreat, it's now front and centre. So this ABC article came out maybe a week ago. 1 in 3 Australians are worried extreme weather will force them to permanently leave their homes. So we're starting to see the build up to this starting to happen and becoming mainstream and trickling down. So managed retreat involves the purposeful, coordinated movement of people and buildings away from risks. And this also involves the movement of people, infrastructure, or communities. So they're not just talking about houses, they're talking about infrastructure not being, being removed. Okay, so this is the State Disaster Mitigation Plan that came out at the New South Wales end of February. They're taking a multi-hazard approach. So again, it's this compounding, looking at all the hazards that are possible, compounding them together. And it talks about widespread managed retreat for the state. And they talk about the two biggest drivers are vulnerability, population growth and climate change. Now, this is just an article from the BBC. They're talking about up to 3 billion people expected to be displaced by the effects of global warming by the end of the century. Should it lead to a shift in the way we think about national borders? Yes, that's what they're very much talking about that. The new patriotic narrative could be about civic nationalism based on the common good, and the common good always frightens me, that phrase. With rights and duties and a passionate cultural attachment to nature and to protecting and conserving places of national or international importance. So it's this idea that we are just a global community, which in one way is true. We all are actually part of this world and we all are, but it's also another narrative that if I get time, I'm going to talk more about. It's a concerning narrative because we have to be good global citizens rather than actually real people based in where we live and who we, our friends and our family and our community and our natural local environment. It becomes something else. Okay, so these are just parts that I'm just going to whiz through this. They're going to develop a state policy for large-scale multi-hazard managed relocation. They're going to draw on the experience of the Northern Rivers to decide the appropriateness of this response. So that's going to come out mid-2025. We're going to have the policy out, so it's just a bit over a year. I want just to note this, because I'm going to go into this, what are they going to do with the land that people are moved off? So you'll look at this, a nature-based mitigation, and I'll come back to that. This is another thing they're going to bring in. So they've got a free bushfire resilience rating app to help protect homes, and that was funded by the New South Wales government. I can't remember which, I think it was Suncor and somebody else, but the IAG, yeah. So anyway, it's where you get your app, and then if you do what you're told to, you feed your information into the app, you do what you're told to, they'll say you've got to go and fix this on your house or that on your house, and if you do it and you log it in somehow, then you get slight, reduced insurance. So it's kind of the carrot part of, update, upgrade, but then you're really feeding all the data about your house, and got to then weigh that up against any privacy and where this is going to lead to as it gets more and more stringent. It's got a lot about innovative funding pathways, financing mechanisms such as the New South Wales Sustainability Bond, so a lot about the private sector investing in this. Oh, and then it's also got this nature-based measures knowledge hub. They want to bring in nature-based measures with an emphasis on Aboriginal knowledge and land management practices. Okay, so this is community. What I find really difficult is that why isn't our government talking about this? This is a New South Wales plan. So I looked at, this plan's I think maybe 80, 100 pages or maybe more. They've got one on there that's just for council, and you look at it, it's a two-page, double-sided page, and it doesn't mention managed retreat. Yet this plan has managed retreat all the way through it. So it really shouldn't be anyone's job to have to do this much hard work. The council and people representing us should be actually spelling out what's going on and where we're heading. So with this massive plan that they put out, they consulted with 35 community members online in 2 online workshops. So that's, to them, is the tick box of, yep, the community's been involved. So again, they're using the greenhouse gas emission scenarios as defined by the IPCC. They're using the high threshold. Okay, so in terms of, this is now LGAs, local government areas, so the Central Coast is the #1 most at risk of climate change in the whole state. They're talking here about, it needs a high degree of collaboration between government, the community and industry, and that they need to really bring in community members and let them know what's going on and hear their voices. So I just constantly am like, okay, well, let's hold them to that. That's in their plan. Where are they actually talking to the community about this, and what is the genuine say that community members actually can have rather than being steered and ignored if they raise any concerns. They talk about community relocation. and then resettlement of those people. So these are the mechanisms they might use. Voluntary, where somebody just says, yep, I'd like to sell my house to the government or another private party. Voluntary scheme, where the government has sole rights to purchase the property, so it's still voluntary, but you're giving it to selling it to the government. Voluntary scheme, which reverts to compulsory once a trigger point has been realised. So once something's happened and then you have to leave, fully compulsory scheme. Funding principles between governments, councils, households and businesses. So people are going to be expected, like with the infrastructure they're talking about and having to put in disaster or warning systems. I'm fairly sure from reading this that it's going to go onto land, rates or things that we're going to have to pay for this infrastructure as well. Okay, so then we get into this ecosystem services that's mentioned, and this is, sorry, let me just double check. So ecosystem services. Ecosystem services are the benefits provided to humans through the transformations of resources or environmental assets. So it's including land, water, vegetation and atmosphere into a flow of essential goods and services, e.g. clean air, water and food. And I'll go over this a few times. But this is one example of what they're doing. They converted a 13-hectare paddock currently used for cattle grazing to an ecosystem that generates Australian carbon credit units. Okay, I'm going to go into the natural asset ecosystem services in a minute. This is the legislation it sits under, the New South Wales Reconstruction Authority Act. This authority may direct relevant entities, so it directs local councils. And it cooperates, it may work in cooperation with other government agencies and other persons and bodies the authority thinks appropriate, whether or not the agencies, persons or bodies are in or of the state. And it's got the authority to acquire land for the declared project by agreement or by compulsory process. And then it can do what it wants with the land, and then it can sell, lease, exchange the land. So that's in the Act that went through in 2022. Now, I found out that with this plan, so you've got the New South Wales government plan that came out at the end of February, but last year the Committee for Sydney put out a very similar plan. They're like a think tank, so they come up with policies and then, influence government basically. So they did this report, Defending Sydney, and it's with ACOM, which is a private corporation, Canadian-based. IAG is a conglomerate of insurance companies. Resilient Sydney, I'll go on and talk about, but that's a Rockefeller initiative. And they talk about, so in my area, the Central Coast, down to Sydney, down to Wollongong, out to the Blue Mountains, we were part of a 6 mega city smart city plan. That was released, the plan for that in 2022. So in this plan that they put out at the end of last year, the Committee for Sydney, they were saying so we were meant to have, the Central Coast was meant to have a region plan for our area coming out this year. So in that they're saying put a high, medium and low climate risk overlay that considers projected future climate risks. So I imagine that's in towns, you'd have a climate risk for your town. And then they talk about Ausgrid, deciding where they're going to keep maintenance of infrastructure. This is where they want to update the quarterly rates notifications to include all hazard exposure linked to asset design standards, and update S.107 certificates to include all hazard exposure and how global warming is expected to change or exacerbate these hazards. That's on your house. So you've got something on your house saying this is the projected outcome for this house. So, you can only see how hard that is going to be to sell that house if you wanted to get out. Okay, so then they talk about enabling getting IPART involved, and they set the costs for council rates and other infrastructure. So I see that as a way that your rates are going to go up, and land tax. And then this one is, they talk here about individualised approaches to relocation, move people out of high-risk areas, but that's not good for the social cohesion, so let's move people together. So that means you're moving into somewhere that's ready to go for a whole bunch of people. Okay, so the Resilient Cities Network, you saw that they were partnering with us, the Committee for Sydney. This is built on the 100 Resilient Cities initiative pioneered by the Rockefeller Foundation in 2013. So that startup, Resilient Sydney, Sydney was chosen, Melbourne was chosen, and that came in 2015 in Sydney. So we need to know, what do they mean by resilience? This has all come in through Rockefeller. So resilience has helped, so what they say, it moves away from traditional disaster risk management, which is founded on risk assessments that relate to specific hazards. Instead, it accepts the possibility that a wide range of disruptive events, both stresses and shocks, may occur but are not necessarily predictable. So it focuses on enhancing the performance of a system in the face of multiple hazards. So they're looking at lots of different hazards compounded, rather than preventing or mitigating the loss of assets. And look, I'm not going to get into Rockefeller more. I mean, you'll see Rockefeller's name depending on how far I get through this, but this is a new book that's just come out by a professor, and it's called Rockefeller Controlling the Game. So you can actually see how Rockefeller's been involved in the climate narrative. Okay, so let's go. I'm just going to move on to smart cities. So smart cities, Sustainable Development Goal, United Nations number 11 is smart cities. When you read what they're talking about, it's all about being safe, resilient and sustainable. I'm just going to touch on the fourth industrial revolution with the World Economic Forum, which is basically that we merge more and more with machines and technology, and it changes what it means to be human. And it's kind of relevant, but some people say we're already into the fifth industrial revolution, which is like a consciousness thing between humans and machines. We're so integrated, and it's got the virtual reality, so it's no longer just picking up a smartphone. It's actually it's really, really embedded, and the systems are working around you. So it's all about robotics, AI, augmented reality, virtual reality. And I'm sure most people know, but the World Economic Forum, the 1,000 largest corporates in the world, and the United Nations signed a strategic partnership in 2019 to implement the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And so you'll see in your government, local council documents and all the documents, everything is brought in under these goals, which all sound really nice on the surface, but there's actually really disturbing implications when you look into them. Okay, so back to the Committee for Sydney. This is just relevant because they put out in 2018, and so the Committee for Sydney has partners such as Amazon, the big banks, the four consultancy, the big consultancy firms. They've got massive corporate entities in there. So this is the report they put out. I told you about the 6 cities area. They put that report out in 2018 saying, we think Newcastle, Central Coast, etc., Blue Mountains should be all united. So then the government puts out a very similar looking plan 4 years later, calling it the 6 cities region. So that's kind of where I tweaked that they're actually quite influential. And for that report, that Sandstone Mega Region report, that was written with, or helped along by a number of people that they say were local organisations across Sydney, the Illawarra, but they're actually all international organisations, or nearly all of them are. So the first one is the CEO of the Business of Cities on Global Mega Regions, and that has a partnership with the World Economic Forum. Resilient Cities has a partnership with the World Economic Forum. It's a very kind of small club in a way. Now, the Greater Cities Commission was dissolved on the 1st of January 2024, but it's just been moved into the newly formed Department of Planning, Housing and Infrastructure. So it becomes even more, probably more harder to even find out who's responsible for what. Okay, so we got Malcolm Turnbull, and a lot happened under Malcolm Turnbull and Lucy Turnbull, but smart cities will grow the innovation economy. That was in 2016, and a Commonwealth Smart Cities Plan was released, which I can't seem to find online at the moment. So it's been in Australia for a while, yet nobody knows about it. And this is the Global Smart Cities Alliance, and that's the G20, which is Australia is a part of, and they have a global policy roadmap for successful ethical smart cities, which is overseen by the World Economic Forum. I was going to show you a little neon clip. So this is just an example of a smart city. I was going to show you, but I don't have the tech. We don't have the tech to show it. But this is in Saudi Arabia, and this is a really swish smart city. I'm not saying they're going to have that same technology here, but it's the model. No roads, cars or emissions, runs on 100% renewable, 95% of land will be preserved for nature, people's health and wellbeing will be prioritised, blah, blah. The line will eventually accommodate 9 million people and will be built on a footprint of just 34 square kilometres. So this is this is an extreme model, but it is the model. It is that everyone stacked and packed into workable neighbourhoods where you leave nature alone because we're intrinsically bad for nature. And nature's intrinsically, there's just too many risks, so everything has to be sanitised. They talk about we've got uninterrupted access to nature within a 2-minute walk, but it's equitable because everyone's got a similar view of the surrounding nature, but they're talking about open spaces on multiple levels, which means you're actually not actually in nature, you're just looking at it. And they're going to be a cognitive city, so this is probably where it's going, it's leading to. They're just trying to get ahead of the pack. So smart is reactive, cognitive is proactive, so it's all about, the data is saying, it's kind of getting in front of where you want to go and steering you rather than just responding to you. Real time is too late. Predictability saves time. Okay, so this is basically about, they're saying a smart city only uses 5% of its citizens' data or the data. This cognitive city would use 95%, so you completely merge the whole time it's collecting data on you. It's like your smartphone that starts to read and change the algorithms and start to put you in a different direction and show you what they think you need to see. So basically it's an incredibly disturbing model where we are going to be 100% control. It's very top-down, it's very dystopian, but maybe some people like this idea. I just want to say, this is what they say, and this is what they say with digital ID in Australia as well. It's really important. Data and trust is so important. So this is what they talk about. So with the digital ID bill that passed last week, Peter Pham, the human rights lawyer, did an excellent amount of work on this. It actually has a clause in there that says if the regulator decides that it shouldn't be voluntary, that organisation, it won't be voluntary. So it's not going to be voluntary. Yeah. At the next crisis, it will not be voluntary. So they always say, well, so they kind of use this analogy that, so if I went and, when I was younger and someone said, can I see your licence to get into a club or something? And then people would be able to see your address as well, who is at the door. So they make out it's really smart because you can just pull up, your age. You don't have to pull up your age and address on a physical card. So they make out that that's really good because it's all this on a blockchain. You can just pull up what you need, the combination of what you need. However, the thing they don't talk about is there's smart contracts embedded in there. So to get into somewhere, you might have to show, it'll just be automatic. You'll have to show, 3 or 4 different pieces of information. So it will be a vaccine passport, it'll definitely be a vaccine status at some point, and it'll be a number of things that you need to bring up together. The contract will be there, and if you don't have it, you won't be able to access things. So that's all. This is the World Economic Forum. But just talking about the importance of digital ID to be able to access basically everything. Okay, so I'm not going to talk more about smart cities really, but it's very much about sensors connected to everything. So they're already around 1 trillion sensors connected to the internet by 2025. That was an estimate. This is the 4th Industrial Revolution by Klaus Schwab. So huge amounts of sensors on everything, huge amounts of cameras collecting data on you and where you're going and what you're doing, data within your house, smart appliances, how much electricity are you using. So experts suggest that in the future every product could be connected to ubiquitous communication infrastructure, and sensors everywhere will allow people to fully perceive their environment. So there's this idea that we can only now perceive our environment through technology and not actually having a direct experience with the environment. It's very bizarre. It's like technology and sensing everything and surveilling everything is going to somehow bring us somewhere better. Like, I don't understand that. Then the example is, this COVID quarantine app that, they had in Hong Kong, I think it was. Yeah, Hong Kong, so you could stay at home with your app which monitored where you went. There was another one I saw where it's like you had something on you, and if you got too closer than 1.5 to your colleagues, it would set off an alarm. And it's overridden. The AI is the brain. It's all just done automatically, automated. So I won't go into any more of that, but the thing that really is outstanding is this is going to take a huge amount of electricity to do this and to be able to control how much electricity we use. So we're going to be managed, monitored, controlled, how much you can use of anything by this massive machinery that's using huge amounts of electricity. So that doesn't make any sense at all. Okay, this is really important, the ecosystem services. This is a massive land grab, in my view. So this is the New South Wales Infrastructure Australia. They're talking about blue and green. So they're starting to call nature infrastructure. That mitigates climate change, but it's infrastructure. And it's an asset class, so it's a commodity. It's something to be traded. And I still can't understand. They're going to somehow value nature to, it gives you fresh air. It gives you this much fresh air, this amount of nature gives this much fresh air, I guess, this much clean water, etc., and then put a price on that. Yep, so they need to clean all this up. So they're working behind the scenes on this. But this is the Rockefeller initiative. It didn't go through, but this is the model. They want to put natural asset companies, make a new asset class and put it on the stock market. And this tried to get through at the end of last year. So what they want to do, the NAC is a corporation whose primary purpose is to actively manage, maintain, restore and grow the value of natural assets and their production of ecosystem services. It talks here about the NACs will be corporations that hold the rights to the ecological performance. So, you hold the right to how much fresh air that piece of land and environment gives you. They also have the authority to do stuff on that land. So it's basically they have a level of ownership over it. So what I'm really, and other people are foreseeing, is that as people have moved off the land, this will be, because it would look a bit awful to just sell it straight on to corporates, that it will be where it's traded somehow, and then the corporates can save the day on the land that you once lived in and make money off it and trade it and have a level of ownership over that land. It's all about public-private partnerships and the money flowing up. So COVID was very lucrative to the wealthiest in the world. The 0.01% went up to owning 11% of the world's wealth. So every crisis there's a massive transfer of wealth. And this also comes through the United Nations Global Compact and the United Nations. So this is where governments, public, private sector, civil society and the United Nations work together to mobilise all available resources. So this is where the corporate entities need to invest and have the investments. The Rockefeller Foundation's Global Economy Recovery Team is working together to strengthen and augment institutions that have been held back by obsolete rules and procedures, focused on building a global financial architecture. And this is the Treasurer's Roundtable, and he's got an Investors Roundtable he set up, I think it was the end of 2022. You've got BlackRock, you've got Blackbird, who I mentioned before, you've got the superannuation funds. So he's working with all of these guys around infrastructure and more. And then you've got the impact market. So this, I can't speak about it now, but it's where philanthropists can put money in, or corporations can put money in for good impact, and then they get a profit return off it. So it's a way that this is the financing model as we go ahead, and then we're paying for all of this infrastructure. And that's where the World Economic Forum's convening public, private and philanthropic partnerships for climate and nature. And I think we've got so many things in here with the Australian government, with how much money that needs to be paid through the United Nations for the United Nations 17 Sustainable Goals. Billions of dollars need to go there. Billions of dollars need to go to green up and put green infrastructure around everywhere and build these systems, basically. So I'm pretty much saying we're going to have a huge transfer of wealth, and people are going to be more and more heavily taxed into. And most Australians are already really starting to struggle and feel like, the land taxes are going up and the insurances are going up. So yes, I'll end on this because it's important. So the way this is always framed is equity, inclusion, this common agenda. We're all in there. It's all for the common good. etc. So this is our common agenda from the United Nations. And they talk here about they want a declaration of a climate emergency and right to a healthy environment. So I don't know whether or not if there's a declaration of a climate emergency, if that then overrides our actual, constitution, as we saw during COVID. So this is the sort of stuff they're talking about. They want to and also the United Nations wants to transform our food systems and transform our food systems. United Nations has a partnership with CropLife, which is Bayer, Monsanto, Syngenta, the biggest chemical companies in the world, are with the United Nations to transform our food systems. So we understand it's synthetic food. And they talk about a social contract. So what I really want to say is, in this, there's this deception. It's an absolute deception that we have to sacrifice ourselves for some arbitrary common good that isn't about actual individual people. It's this weird idea that's actually not, and it's not even good. And who's making that up? Who's saying what the common good is? Because if you've had any concerns like some of us, over the last few years, you understand that the othering, the separation, the vitriol, it actually hasn't been about any sort of real common good. It's been very harsh and nasty. So you've got to be like, this whole common good narrative is really concerning, and it's the tyranny of the common good. So they want to create in children, SDG 4 is about education, and one of them is being a good global citizen. So you're a good global citizen. UNESCO is the children's arm of this, or looking after children, promotes global citizenship education. So this isn't about just we are actually all part of this world. This is different. And this is I'm going to finish on this. In September the 22nd to 23rd, our leaders around the world are going to get together and sign a pact for the future. And it's the summit of the future. And they're going to sign some sort of pact on our behalf. And it's going to be about, there's a huge amount, if you read it, it's a lot about transferring money. We need more money from financing from your countries and other things in there. And basically, I wrote to Albanese, or emailed him a month ago, saying who's going to represent us, how are you going to let the Australian people know, what are you going to sign, are you going to talk to the Australian people at all? No answer. There's just no response from government. It takes forever to get any sort of response. So I don't think it's okay that our government officials are going to go over and sign a pact that has not been in our media at all, and we don't know what's in it and what they're going to sign or try and change. And when you look at even them, even the United Nations, and they talk about their stakeholder consultations for this pact for the future, it's like 200 people they've consulted with, most of them really young. Like, how can you have a pact for the global future of the world with 200 people actually having some sort of form of voice? So I'm just going to finish there. I'm sorry if it's overwhelming. It's really big. I think that the possibility that we can, because what they have to do is they're going to start rolling out, and they're starting it already, disaster mitigation workshops, resilient workshops in your town, and they're going to do community consultation. Now, we have to learn how to go into those community consultations and actually be effective, and if you're concerned about it, and raise the bigger picture, because you won't be told this bigger picture. So learn it. I can share these slides if you want me to send it to you. Start to look at the documents and go in and put what's in the documents and say, what's the modelling? How does this work? How much are we expected to pay for this? What sort of rights do we have here? Put the bigger picture on the agenda now, because it's going to be normalised over the next year and a bit. So that's what I would say. And just give it a go. We just have to give it a really good go and demand that we want to live in a country. They say through their documents the community is really important to be on board. Okay, well, we're here and we want to be on board. So thank you.